Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another podcast at Freedom Motorsport. We are joined here yet again with a Vietnamese Formula 4 driver introducing to all of you Mr. Anh Nguyen, who has been racing last year in the Formula 4 Southeast Asian Championship and has also been racing recently in the UAE Formula 4 Championships, named Formula UAE Trophy and also the UAE 4 Championship. Um, Ben, thank you so much for coming here today. We're really delighted to have you here. So, to begin off, firstly, how did you, as yourself, fall in love with racing initially? Because I feel racing has been part of you for a long time, as in it's part of your passion, I believe.
So this is actually a pretty interesting story. So firstly, I would just like to introduce myself. My name is Anh Nguyen. I'm Vietnamese. So I was born and raised in Vietnam, lived in Vietnam basically my whole life. And I know a lot of people like to think that I've been born from like a different country or I lived in a different country for a while since my accent is not really Vietnamese, but I'm fully Vietnamese and yeah, so to start off with my love for racing, I think it just started off as a like at a very young age. So my parents knew I always loved cars. I always loved watching racing ever since I was like 2, 3 years old. But really, my career in racing did not start until very recently. So I think that's what makes me a bit unique in terms of sort of career progression. Most drivers, or almost all drivers, they start out in karting since they're like 5, 6, 7 years old. And they do karting for a few years before they finally start making their move up to Formula 4 by around like age 15, 16. I basically kind of skipped that whole karting progression. I had my first go-kart race back in 2024. It was December 2024, so it was very, very late. And then right after that, I kind of attracted the attention of a Formula 4 owner who happened to be Vietnamese. And that kind of gave me a chance to step into Formula 4 almost immediately for the 2025 Formula 4 Southeast Asia Championship. But we'll get into that later. So I think my love for racing just started out because when I was a kid, I always had like toy cars, like Hot Wheels or RC cars, and I loved playing with them. And I think that kind of just slowly grew my interest in racing. Obviously, movies like the Cars movies helped build that passion. But then ever since then, I've always had an interest in vehicles. But interestingly enough, I was always more interested in like the engineering side of it. Like I always loved learning how cars were built, like the suspension, the engineer, like the aerodynamics, the engine components. And so until recently, I always thought I would be an engineer. That's what I was usually like doing before I started racing, is I would study a lot of engineers, studying physics, studying math, making sure I get good grades, and sort of mapping out how my career would go if I wanted to become an engineer, like what schools I would go to. And so I was so dead set on being an engineer that being a racing driver out of nowhere came kind of suddenly. And it's a bit hard to pinpoint exactly when I realized I wanted to be a driver, but I think it started when I got my like racing simulator, and I realized I actually had a big passion for driving as well. And I think it actually is a really big like complementary thing to be interested in engineering while you're racing, because racing is such a physics and science based sport. You know, like vehicle dynamics is like a huge part of going fast. And I think having that sort of knowledge already learned because I'm studying to be an engineer, I think actually gave me a bit of a, a head start in terms of starting racing. So I think that's really where it came from at the end of the day.
Okay, and when did were you like a rental karter before, or was it a purely a new thing, driving in general, or did you like do rental karting for like a couple of years, like how many people do, like just for their passion they go on rental karting, or was it like for the last couple of years a completely new thing that you started as a whole, including rental karting and your simulator and as a whole racing in general?
So this is actually also another interesting story. So I actually, on the summer of 2024, I went to a university in California. So UCLA is a really big college there. And I went there for a summer program, which was designed for high school students who had an interest in STEM and particularly racing, because when I was there, I was working in a group of amazing people, and the objective of the whole summer like program was to build a go-kart. Um, And so that's like really my first exposure of go-karting and racing. So I did a lot of like proper racing, is that I did a lot of research in designing and go-karting, what makes them fast. And I had a lot of fun working with my friends to build that like a go-kart. It was not a good go-kart. It was very like rudimentary. It was like electric, very slow, but I had a blast doing it. And then so when I returned to Vietnam, I learned that they recently opened a rental kart place near where I lived in Vietnam. And so that's when I decided to like give it a go and try go-karting out for a bit in rental karting. I think this was September 2024, so still very, very recent in terms of like a normal racing career. So my first ever time driving a rental car was September 2024, and after that I kind of just fell more in love with racing. And so from then on until my first actual go-kart race in December, I just did a lot of rental karting as well as a lot of sim racing. And then, yeah, the rest is history, really.
So you went from basically knowing nothing about, like, generally nothing about driving and racing, to having an entire season of F4 under your belt within a year and a half, essentially, but even less than that, I think.
Yeah, I think like a few months more
That's
realistically.
I don't think there's anyone who's ever, like, done that. Like, okay, I don't know, like, I've never driven a car, I don't know much about cars, and within 1.5 years, I've already driven F4 for a season. I think you're the first person to ever have that kind of a career trajectory, I think, because
Yeah,
you
it's
don't see anyone doing that ever. Like, that's okay. That's a new thing I'm learning. Okay. So,
yeah,
okay, so in September 2024, you came back to Vietnam and you started rental karting, right? So
yeah.
obviously, when you have to go to a professional Rotax karting or whatever, IAM X30, whatever, that cost it, the cost rise infinitely, because even in India, a cheap country, the season costs 25,000 euros, I think, a year in national karting, and I think the something similar in rest of Asia. So how did you convince your parents, or like, what was the process of, okay, I'm just a rental karter, I like racing, to getting a full-on contract with a karting team, and getting to know that karting team, getting a national license done, and doing your first test with that karting team, and then finally getting to that race. So what was that process? Because I think a lot of people, if they want to start a racing career, if they want to do at least a couple of races, get stuck in that part, because they think, okay, here is one thing I cannot, that this is one level I cannot retain. Well, I do rental karting, but I can't get to professional karting so easily. So I think this intermediary step is, I think, a pretty difficult step for many people. So what did you do to get directly into professional karting championship within 2 months? That process.
So it's a bit generous to say my first rental car race, my first kart race was like professional since it was more like a rental car race because like IME or road tax they're two-stroke, but these carts were four-stroke, so they had like the proper professional kart chassis. Like they're not full-on rental carts, but they did have a four-stroke engine, so they were quite slow. Or not, they were pretty quick compared to rental cars, but they definitely weren't nearly as powerful as a two-stroke. And so it didn't really take too much to get into the competition. I was basically invited to join because they knew I was rental karting a lot and they saw I was quick. And so I came into it more just like looking for a bit of fun, like, oh, it's gonna be fun to compete and race, and I'll see how well I stack up against other like experienced Vietnamese karters. Since I didn't really expect to win because I knew Vietnam actually does have quite a few karters, and it actually has a bit of history in that since like there's Alex Sawyer or a few other people who've done karting in Vietnam as well as internationally. So I didn't really expect to do well, but when I actually arrived there, I actually ended up winning. So that was quite the achievement for me. Obviously, there it wasn't as like tough of a competition as if there would be like Alex Sawyer's other people there, but it was still quite a good amount of like experienced karters, and so I was really happy when I managed to take the win and like compete competitively against them. Um, but yeah, it was more just rental karting, and so that win ended up uh, spreading a bit of attention because it's like this kid who's never done karting before just comes in out of nowhere and ends up winning his first ever kart race. It does kind of like cause a bit of a stir, and then I think because of that, it's I attracted one of the co-owners of a Formula 4 team called Black Arts Racing, and he's Vietnamese. And so because of that, I ended up being able to land myself like a conversation with him and my team principal back then. And that's what I think ultimately led me to getting the Formula 4 test drive and then the full season in Formula 4 as well, like the following year. So it's a bit of a crazy progression, like one kart race and then straight into Formula 4. But yeah, it's a bit crazy. I actually
So,
did end up having two like actual proper kart races. I had a Rock Cup Singapore race where I was in the rookie category. I ended up, honestly, I should have been third because I was like pace wise, I was definitely third or second in that weekend, but I ended up getting taken out in the second race. So I ended up having to start near the like last place and only ended up finishing like sixth in the race. It was still a lot of fun. And then I did a IME X30 race in Malaysia, which is like the senior category. And obviously, like that's one of the most competitive karting category like grids you could ever be on around Asia. And I literally came into that with two kart races of experience. And so I was like towards the back, I was just kind of chilling because I basically my Formula 4 team signed me up to these races and provided me like the team to race with because they wanted me to get my international license to compete in Formula 4, which until then I wasn't qualified for yet. So they basically just told me to do these kart races and just have fun, not to take them too seriously, just take them as like a learning experience. So I kind of approached it with just like, okay, I'll have fun and see how it goes. So the Rock Cup one I was pretty competitive in, but obviously IMEX30 is like, senior categories, all the best karting drivers in Asia and Australia. So I was towards the back, but still having a lot of fun. And yeah, that was basically my karting career summarized. Three kart races, and after that it was Formula 4.
so okay, so you've done your three car races, you got your license, and now you go for your first Formula 4 test. I believe that was a Sepang, or
Yeah. Actually, my first Formula 4 test was before the two kart races, weirdly enough. So I did my first rental kart race, had a Formula 4 test, and then did the two other like kart races in order to get my license. And then I raced in Formula 4 right after.
so let's talk about that the initial Formula
Yeah,
4
the
test.
timeline.
How is it? Good,
It
bad,
was a bit
ugly?
it was kind of like what you'd expect from someone who'd never driven or raced like properly before. So I actually had a lot of fun. I was being coached by a driver named Nikhil Bora. I think you might know him since he's done Formula Regional and
Obviously,
so
yeah, yeah.
on.
He's Indian
He's
as
a
well,
very nice
half Indian.
guy.
Yeah,
Um, he taught me how to use a manual, which up until then I didn't know how to use. And then we did one day in the Suzuki Swift, which is like a touring car around Sepang. And that was like my first ever time at the track. Like literally first time driving a car, first time driving on a racetrack. I think I was maybe like 6 seconds off, something like that. Um, because the touring cars, they're very easy to drive. They're front wheel drive, so you and literally anything, just add more throttle and it'll be really easy to drive. The only issue that made me slow was because I didn't know how to like shift quickly enough. So I was always like over slowing or having messy upshifts and downshifts. And that was like the only reason why I was really slow. Otherwise, I think I was actually like he said he was impressed by how quickly I could carry speed through the corners despite my first time on track. But then the Formula 4 didn't go nearly as smoothly because I got into the Formula 4 and I realized the clutch because Formula 4 uses a foot clutch, right? So you have to, be careful with it. It's like it was actually not very easy to use. So I ended up stalling like a lot on my first time driving the F4 car. And and yeah, it was basically just stalling a lot and then going out and then driving really slowly just to get used to like the tires, the car's movement and like the G forces. I ended the whole weekend maybe like 6, 7 seconds off pace, which it seems slow, but then you consider like I've never raced before, I've never driven like properly a car before. Um, so I think the team were still happy with the progress I made considering where I started. And then yeah, it was basically just after that I had like two kart races and then I had like one more Formula 4 test and then actually no, I had my Rock Cup race then my Formula 4 test, then IME X30, and then the first Formula 4 round right after. That's the progression.
So how does someone feel that okay, okay, when you go into the car and it's a manual car, right? It must
Yeah.
be pretty difficult to adapt to it. So like, what's that like? How long does it take for a driver to like get used to it? Because you have people coming from KZ2 who have done already shifter cars, so they can easily adapt to F4 cars. But for someone like you, what is that process, the exact process of learning a manual car? Because I feel like even if I were to go right now and drive an F4 car, it would be pretty difficult to get into a corner, get in the correct gear, then gear up the correct way, and also just want to know that exact feeling or that difficulty of what it takes to get used to a manual car, like that exact thing. I don't think many people know about that part.
I think, well, the Formula 4 car, it's still like paddle shifters. You
Yeah.
only use the foot clutch to get them going. So paddle shifter is actually really easy, just, up, up and down, down. If you sim race a lot, then it's really easy to get into like the Formula like 4 way of shifting. But the Suzuki Swift one is much more difficult, right? Because I spent like half a day in a parking lot with Nikhil on the passenger seat as he walked me through how to start a like manual car and how to shift up and shift down. And then I went into the Suzuki Swift. And then it's just like for me, the difficulty was just I ended up braking too much when I'm like downshifting because I can't like downshift quickly enough. So I end up over slowing the car into the corner, and that's what usually kills like the lap time. It's just being way too slow on the downshift. The upshift wasn't too bad since it's relatively simple, but then like when you're entering a corner at really high speed and you brake, and then it's like you have to go from sixth, fifth, fourth, third, and then second. It's like and each time you have to get on the clutch, get off the clutch, and do all sorts of techniques. And that's really what like kind of caught me out with my lack of experience. I just wasn't really smooth with the upshift and downshift. So that's really the only thing that was a difficulty. The upshift, it was not too bad. Just occasionally I misshifted. Um, but yeah, I think for the most part, it's just getting the timing with the clutch and the gas and the brake, as well as like, moving to the right gear, especially when it's not like completely clear what gear you're in. I think that's something I struggle with. It's just like not knowing if I shifted to second or to like fourth or whatever, because it's like the gear knob is a bit like it doesn't move very much. So the difference between second, third, and fourth is not like a whole lot
All right.
in
So
terms of like the positioning.
you do your first test, you do your karting races. Now we're in the 25 season. We're starting the F4C season, right?
Yeah,
So in the entirety of the season, so you finished P7 with 93 points, and your best finish was a P3 finish in the first round, right? Where
yeah,
you would expect to have one of the worst finishes in your first round, and then
yeah.
you progress through the season. So I'm a bit confused. Like, take us through that first round.
Yeah. So the thing is that like it I got better across the round. Like I think if the current me time traveled back into Formula 4 Southeast Asia, I think I'd be fighting for podiums pretty consistently. But I think it's just that the field also got more competitive as the time went on. So in that first round, it was just everyone kind of getting to ropes with Sepang and Formula 4. Some drivers have driven there a few times before, some drivers are complete rookies. And I think in that second, like first, like in that first round, in that second race where I got my podium, I think everything just kind of lined up perfectly for me to get it. Um, in the first race, it was kind of just like chill because it rained a little bit, so there's a safety car start, and then I kind of just got into like a good position to just like stay where I was. The guys behind me were slower than I was. The guys in front of me were quicker than I was, so I was just kind of driving on my own for a bit. I was in seventh, but then my teammate in front of me spun because there was like a wet part of the track. Um, but then he like slotted right behind me, so I ended up finishing sixth, which was already a good result for me. Like, okay, congratulations, you survived your first Formula 4 race, and it actually happened to be a like mixed conditions race, which is impressive enough. And then the second race happened, and it's just a bit crazy at the start. So I was P6, and then at the start, I think my teammate passed me into the first corner, which is like fine. He's way quicker anyway. Um, it was only behind me because he spun, but then I think he and another driver had contact in the second corner because Sepang, it's like the hairpin and then another hairpin right after, right?
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
that's where a lot of contact tends to happen, especially at the start, because all the cars are just kind of like moving around, they're side to side, and they're squeezing into the small hairpin. So then my teammate and another driver had contact, and they both went onto the grass. And so that was already immediately two positions for me. So I went from seventh to fifth. And then another driver had contact with someone else, which gave them a puncture. And I just kind of drove around the outside of them. And then I ended up in fourth in three corners, basically. And after that, it was just kind of staying where I was and hoping to not like lose position or whatever. So then I was in fourth for a few laps, and then my teammate who went onto the grass, he recovered well, so he didn't really drop that far behind. And then he ended up like we had like a little bit of a battle for like a couple corners, and then he passed me, which dropped me back to fifth. But then as the race progressed, someone in front was going slowly. I think he had a bit of damage, so I had to overtake him, and then I moved back up to fourth, and then I just drove till fourth until the end of the race. But then someone in front of me got disqualified for being underweight, and then that gave me a podium. So it's not that if you ask me, it's not that impressive of a race since I didn't do anything like crazy. It was more just a lot of like the situation being very lucky for me, and that's what I consider it. But during the race, there was also a Chinese driver. I think Cheng Meng was it. He was an experienced Formula 4 driver. And he was basically on the back of my car for like the entire race, or at least like the second half of the race, I think for like 15 minutes. He was within like 1, 2 seconds of me for the entire time. And so like for my second ever Formula 4 race, that was a lot of pressure to put behind when like another driver who's more experienced is just like sitting behind you, following you. But then I think it also gave me a good motivation to like push as much as I can. And so I ended up like so we ended up never fighting because I think I was just quick enough to stay out of his like attacking range. And so I think we just kind of drove like that until the very end. So that's basically the story of my first ever podium.
How did it in race one? How did the start feel? Because I think for a driver, when you go into a Formula 4 start, your first ever start, and there are cars all around you, ahead of you, behind you. How does that feel? Does it give you
Oh,
the adrenaline pump? Like,
it was a safety car start because it was wet
oh,
on one part of the track. So it kind of ruined the whole thing. But I actually had a really bad safety car start because well I'm not experienced with how like safety car starts work. So I ended up dropping a little bit far back from the guy in front. But then it wasn't too bad because I don't think I would have mounted. Uh, but yeah, my first goal of that race was just to like survive and see if I can maybe make positions. But I don't think not much happened in that first race. The second race was well, I already explained how the second race went, and then the third race, I stalled on like the like going out to the grid. Basically, like you exit the pit, then you go onto the grid where all the engineers are like mechanics are waiting
on
for
your
you.
installation lap.
Yeah, not the
Mm.
installation lap, but the formation lap. I stalled
Okay.
when starting on the formation lap, so I dropped to the back. And so the rule is that you have to like catch up to and get your position back before a certain part, or else you have to go all the way to the back. But I didn't know that rule, and I was asking on the radio to see like, oh, like am I supposed to pass all of them, or am I supposed to stay at the back, and just go to my position after? But the radio was broken for the whole weekend, so I had no radio, and so I ended up being at the back. I didn't get my position back, but then I still moved to that position on the grid. And so that gave me a drive-through penalty. And then, so because of that, I got a drive-through penalty, which in a Formula 4 race is basically like race
Mm.
over. Because that's like a good 30 seconds that you lose easily. But then after that, it started raining really heavily, like really, really heavily. Like the track was flooded, and we were all out on slicks while it was flooded, and I was just trying to like survive basically. Like I spun under braking, like I was just braking, and then the car just like whipped around and did like a 360, because it aquaplaned, and yeah, after that I was basically crawling at like 60 kilometers an hour just to make it back. Um, and I think it got red flagged, and yeah.
That too on slick
So
tires.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, the first weekend was pretty eventful, but I honestly thought it was like compared to where I was at the start of the year with the Formula 4 test, I think it was actually pretty good because I was like what 7 seconds off in practice in like the first testing, and then in qualifying I was maybe like 2.5 seconds off, which on a track like Sepang, which is like 2 minutes, is actually not too big of a gap considering like everything, like not knowing like the optimal line yet, and my first time ever qualifying. So I was I was pretty happy with the performance in the first round, honestly.
So now you go into the rest of the season, and the results, although you were a completely new driver, they stayed the same. Like they were the same, like P6, P7, P8 kind of finishes
Yeah.
for the entire season. So do you believe that although these results came, was it because of that the quality of the grid increased at the end of the season, or was it that okay, there was a certain limit that you would have reached in terms of your raw pace in that season? So what was how would you what do you rate your own season for the rest of the season? How do you rate your own performances in
I,
perspective to the rest of the grid?
I think compared to the rest of good, I think I put myself in like probably like a 7 out of 10, just because obviously like my results were kind of like after the first round, my results were kind of like up and down. So they weren't great, but they also weren't like terrible. So I was kind of keeping things consistent. But I feel like a lot of my results could have been better if I had made like slightly better judgments, or if I also just gone a little bit luckier in some situations. Um, I made a few mistakes in a few like races, and that's why I kind of didn't get as good of a result as I would have liked. Um, that's why I think I'm putting myself in like a 7 out of 10, just because I was able to keep it consistent at least and finish seventh, um, ahead of two very experienced drivers. And I also managed to like outperform my teammate who like one of my teammate Josh Berry, great guy. He's he also did karting, and I think that was also his rookie season. And I think I in general, like over the season and pace wise, I think I performed better than him, which is why I wouldn't rate myself too badly, because compared to yourself to your teammates, it was basically me, another rookie, and two very experienced Formula 4 drivers. Inigo Anton, who's raced for like 20 years well, not 20 years, but like 10, 15 years in
Hmm.
cars, and he also did a few Formula 4 races beforehand. And then there's Vishan Rajiv, who did a lot of karting and also a lot of Formula 4 and Indian Racing League championships. And so I think compared to them, I wasn't actually as far off as I expected. So I was actually quite happy in how I closed the gap to them over the season. Um, because at the start of the season, I was very far off, and then towards the end, I was actually closer. So there was improvement, but I think if I just made better judgments in the races themselves, I think the results could have been higher. So, for
I
example, the
it was
final
it
race of the season.
Yeah, no,
Um,
it was still not your season was still not that bad, considering that you had no karting experience. And if you look at your teammates, Rishon has done an entire many seasons of Indian karting, and he was one of the great guys in Indian karting. But still, considering your own experience, shouldn't you rate yourself higher? Like, or is it still under your expectations given your own prior experience? Because I think as an outsider looking at you, being in a position in the relative attacking position to other drivers, performing on the same general level as the other drivers, that's a great thing considering three karting races. So I think there should be a bit more leniency to your own results. But again, I guess every driver has their own uh,
Obviously, I think in terms of like learning and improvement, I think it's a much better season than just an eight. Like I think I would put like an 8 out of 10 in terms of like 8 or 9 out of 10 out of learning, because there's a lot of drivers who do really well in their first Formula 4 season, like their first year of karting or first year of car racing. They do really well and they will start winning and podiuming
hmm.
immediately. But I don't think I can really compare myself to those types of people, because one, they're either like karting champions for like years and years and years before that, or they've done like ridiculous amounts of testing, um, as well. Like Niccolo Macagnani, he's driven that Formula 4 car for maybe like 4 years before he actually had his first race. So like I don't think it's like the most fair comparison.
And not to
But
forget
then
he's tested F2 as well.
Yeah. So I don't think it's the most fair comparison. So I think in terms of like where I started and then where I ended, I was actually I think it could be like an 8 or 9 out of 10 in terms of like learning. But I think in terms of like results wise and what I could have done, I think I'll still have to leave myself like a 7 out of 10 just because there was a lot of missed opportunities in my finishes. Like the final race of the season, I was actually I think I started P5 and I only ended up finishing P7 because I stalled at the start. And so I dropped all the way to the back and I had to kind of get back up to seventh. Um, and so that was like that stupid mistake basically costed me a chance at a podium again because looking back at the lap times and the sector times, I was actually the fourth or third quickest driver on in the race. Like some of my sector times were only being beaten by Alex Soy and Macagnani. So pace-wise, I think I should have been further up, but then I only ended up getting like a mediocre seventh place finish entirely because of like um, just not maximizing. And there's also another race where I dropped to 10th because of a mistake at the start again. And I should have been able to fight back up to eighth or ninth, or maybe seventh even, because it was really close up there. But I just got stuck behind another car that was way slower that I should have been able to overtake much more easily. But then I just got bogged down in a battle that I should have been able to handle more decisively. And I think that kind of inspired me to improve my racecraft much more. And so I think it's a good learning experience, but I definitely think there was a lot of just missed opportunities or not like maximized the races that I was in. But there's also a few like bad luck races as well where I did do really well and then I ended up getting like hit by my teammate or something like that. And it kind of cost me a good result. So I think in terms of my overall performance, I'd give myself a 7. But as terms of like how much I learned and gained, I think I'd put like a 9 out of 10.
Okay, so now you're done with your, you could say, first season of Formula 4. So why, what was the reasoning behind getting into Formula Trophy, that one round at the end of 2025? Well, I think the start of 2026, you did one round, and then you also signed with Evans for 2 rounds for the UAE 4 Championship in
Yeah,
Yas Marina and the last round in Qatar, right? So what?
yeah.
So how did that come about? Like from going from Southeast Asian racing to now suddenly going to a 30 grade, 35, 40 grade championship. So what was the reasoning behind it? What was the process behind getting there?
I just basically because the Southeast Asian season ended by like September, and until then, until like December, I basically have one testing time with Black Arts, and that was literally like the only time I drive a car between Southeast Asia and like the next year. So like unlike other drivers who can spend their time like testing in Italy and going all over the world, I didn't quite have that opportunity, and so I just wanted like to race something um, at some point over like the winter, and so the trophy came up. Originally, Black Arts wanted to enter me into the Middle East with their team, but then they ended up not going. I think just not because just because not enough drivers were willing to sign with them, and they didn't want to bring just me. So I ended up having to go with Evans GP, which basically Black Arts told me to go with Evans GP as like a recommendation. And so that's why I signed with them for trophy and then UAE. And it's just like a way of getting more experience and getting more lap like track time. Um, and I actually had a lot of fun. I think the amount of things I've learned racing in such a competitive field is actually like way more than I would have learned like doing some basic testing or racing in Southeast Asia. So I was actually really happy with the decision, even if the results weren't quite there. But yeah, that's basically it.
Okay, so when you go to the Middle East, you see all these European drivers coming in who are, f- tested a lot. They have like huge personnel, huge teams around them. So, I'm really curious. How does a driver, okay, become a great driver? Because you have tons and tons of drivers who are, doing karting, and then you have maybe 2, 3, 5% of them going into Formula 4. So what exactly is that team you need around you or the driver prep you need around you to maximize your results? Because if you have a guy, let's say two people, A and B, same level of let's say raw talent. One guy has a trainer and probably has a simulator and also has some other bunch of testing and also a lot of prep with the team. Another guy just ends up there, with nothing, with no one around him. And obviously the first person will obviously be far better, right? So what exactly, if a driver wants to reach Formula One, or the top motorsport like the WEC or IMSA and all, what exactly is the type of people you need around you? And what is it, and what have you seen going into the Middle East, the type of teams that those drivers have, that is allowing them to even think about getting an F1 seat?
That's a tricky question. I'm trying to think of an answer right now because it's not like I've experienced that personally. Like I think Evans is a great team, but they're not like Prema or
No, no,
Trident or like
not
yeah.
like the team as in like the racing team, but
Okay.
like the people they have managing them
Right.
and training them, not exactly like the team.
Right. I think it's just people who are able to push you in the right direction, which it's kind of vague, but like it's the people who don't let you get comfortable with what you're doing at the moment. Like they're trying to push you to always improve and better yourself, even if that means putting yourself in more difficult situations or even when you feel like you're a little bit demotivated. I think it's good to have a team of people around you who are ready to push you and tell you maybe like uncomfortable truths like they won't always say, "Oh, you're so good and you're great and you should just keep doing what you're doing," right? It's people who are willing to tell you like, "Okay, this is not working," or what you're doing right now is good, but then it could be much better if you do this and that and so on. I think that's the one thing that sets apart the okay drivers with the like best of the best is that they're always striving to improve and they're not just there to race, but they're more just there. They're there to learn and see what they can improve and then they're always striving to do better than what they did last time. So I think that's like the big difference maker for me at least.
Okay, so in your own team in the Evans, your teammate is Alba Larson, right? She has a big, like, let's say, like a team around her, I guess, like her own personal team. So what, now she comes from F1 Academy. She has sponsors and also she is aiming for F1. So what, do you notice any difference between how she is preparing versus how probably you are preparing for a round with the same team, with Evans, but with your own respective personal team? So what, is there any difference between how both of you, or in cases like this, prepare for a round, or is it the same? There's not much of a
I
difference.
I'm not exactly sure because I don't know too much about how she's been preparing, but like the main difference I noticed between her and us, like me, is that like she has a different livery on her car because of the sponsor. But that's it's the difference doesn't seem really all that big when you actually get to the track and when you meet the person. They're the same driver. They attend the driver like the debriefings during with the team. They take notes like when looking at telemetry. It's all the same. And before the round, I can't really comment much. But I do know quite a few drivers, especially in the Middle East, they do a lot more like professional simulator testing. So there's a professional simulator team called Drivers Lab in the Middle East, and I see like many drivers signing up for it. Um, and so on. But then for me, for example, like my personal team around me is literally just my parents. Like I don't have a manager, I don't have a personal trainer like that trains me like or coach that helps me in formula racing. It's more just me, myself, and what I can do. And so the responsibility of like preparing for a race weekend falls entirely on me. Um, so I'm always like I'm always driving like a crap ton on the simulator, trying to tweak the simulator to feel as real as possible. I'm training a lot in the gym just to get my physical like strength up, my endurance and so on, so that driving feels more like easy for me. Um, because when you're driving and you have to feel like physically like you're struggling, then that's when you're not going as quickly as you can. Driving is the quickest when you feel effortless, like when it feels like you're just doing what you're doing best instead of like fighting the car. And so that's why I put a lot of focus on like physical strength and training. But I also do a lot of like note taking. Like I watch a lot of onboard videos that the team sends me of like drivers at Abu Dhabi, or I watch a lot of races. I've watched almost every single Formula 4 race from 2023 to like now at Yas Marina, just to get as much information, data as possible. It's like, okay, this is where drivers overtake. this is what a good overtake looks like. This is what good defending looks like. This is what a safety car restart is going to look like, or this is what usually happens in a crash or at the start of the race. And that gives me a lot of information about what to do when I'm in similar situations as well. I'm not 100% sure. But that's basically the extent of my preparation. I can't really say much for other drivers, but I assume it's not too different, if you ask me.
Is Formula 4 that physical? Like, do you feel the G forces? Because I feel like in karting, like it's pretty physical, but is Formula 4 that physical in terms of the G forces you feel? Or is that something you feel in high categories?
Formula 4 is less physical than karting, if you ask me. Because
Hmm.
I had the experience of doing IME X30 in one weekend, and then the very next weekend I had my first Formula 4 race. So that was a very unique experience. But the IME X30 race was far more like tiring, just because I think the car there's no suspension. You're kind of there's no seatbelt, so you're just being tossed around in the cart. The G forces is I think similar or even more in karting, just because like they're so light and they move so quickly. But I think for me, formula like karting, you just feel it more. You feel everything more. Like you feel your own arms, you feel the curbs, you feel the movement, the sliding. It's all much more physical, if you ask me. So like after every kart race, I actually still feel tired. Even rental karting, I still feel like it's not very easy to do rental karting for
Hmm.
long amounts of time, especially endurance races, which I've done. You drive there for a while, and it's like the steering's heavy, it's bumpy, and so on. Formula 4, it's actually not very physical in comparison, just because I think like the only thing is that braking is much harder because the brake pedal you need much more force, but then the G forces, the steering like heaviness, I think it's not more. I think it might be even a little less. I think it's also just it helps that there's suspension and there's dampening and there's seat belts, which means you're very comfortable and everything happens a little bit more slowly. So it's not like you're just constantly like jumping around and being tossed around like in go-karting basically.
I think karting, especially in like your forearms, it's pretty stressful on the forearms, I believe, because like I do four-stroke karting and it really like destroys your arms. I don't know. I personally never feel anything in the neck. It's always on the arms. But okay. The next thing I want to go a bit sideways from racing. Um, the FIA says that they want to change the sport. They want to make it accessible for everyone. Regardless of your financial resources. But do you think that the sport is you know becoming cheaper or staying at the same level of cost, or is it still rising exponentially?
I I think it's hard to say since I don't really look into it too much, but I think in a way the sport's becoming more like more known at least. At the very least, there's more awareness, there's more support for it. But I don't know about cheaper. I think if anything, it might be even more expensive than before. Since I've talked to some of my old team principals who've done maybe Formula 3 back in like the 2010s, like the early 2010s. And even then they were talking about how a lot of it was like even more expensive, like even like cheaper than it is now. But I think there's it also like because so much more people are getting into racing, like so many more like rich families, um, and so on. Like even I admit my family is like we're successful, like we're not lacking in money, which I think is a big part in letting me do Formula 4 racing. Um, but I definitely think the sport is at the very least becoming more like popular and more open, but I don't know if it's more like accessible really in terms of like the cost. I think it might still be it's still very expensive. It still costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to do a season in Formula 4, even just karting, it costs like so much money. And we don't even talk about like going up to Formula 3, 2, 1, the amount of like millions of dollars it's gonna take or how many sponsors you need. So it's nice that the FAA say they want to make the sport more like open, but at the moment I'm not seeing like the effects of it quite yet.
And I think the top the Prema US and RSGP One Motorsport, all these guys spend like $1.5 million a season, including
Yeah,
testing and racing and their winter season. So it's gone off the rails, to be honest. Like it F4 should not be that expensive. It should be a third of that.
yeah.
So, all right. So And now then people say, okay, that okay, maybe racing is expensive, but a good way to get into physical racing is by doing sim racing, right? Especially that's what Verstappen and Bortoleto said on a podcast. But is that also inherently incorrect? Because okay, from in my personal opinion, if like say Verstappen says that okay, if you want to get into high levels of racing, you can start anytime in sim racing. But that point of getting into sim racing, because you need a simulator, you need games, you need to have that time to race for thousands and thousands of hours to get noticed by someone, and then probably you get into a professional esports team, and then probably you have a slight chance of getting into physical racing. So is it what Verstappen says that if you don't have money for real racing, you can still do sim racing, but he isn't taking into account the cost of getting into sim racing, because 90% of the world can't buy a simulator and sim race all the time, because that's also a very specific demographic. So is it like possible for a sim racer to get into physical racing, actually not even a sim racer, for someone to get into sim racing n- with not that great of finances and then shift to physical racing? Because I don't think what Verstappen is saying is actually realistic as of now.
I think it's not very realistic, but it's also not impossible. I know, because back when I was working with Black Arts, the team principal, Alex Yoon, he has his own like sim racing team, which I've raced with like a lot just to like practice on the simulator and have a bit of fun. And there's a lot of people there in that team who specialize in sim racing. And what they sim race on is not very like fancy, like direct drive and load cell pedals. A lot of them drive on like basic Fanatec or Logitech wheels and type of like pedals and so on, and they're very quick. And I think a lot of them enter into like international competitions, and because of that, they end up getting money or they end up getting attention and free drives in other like motorsport, like actual motorsport categories. So I think it's not impossible, but it does take a lot of work and still like you have to be a bit lucky to be in that position. But I don't think what he says is inherently wrong because there are like pathways open to like cheap sim racing and then just kind of slowly building up until you are able to enter into big competitions and race in like real life motorsports. But I think to be fair, even then, it's still like the traveling cost. Obviously, it still costs quite a bit of money to even buy a cheap simulator, let alone upgrade one until it's like a competitive level. So I think if you're like really, really poor and you can't even afford that, I think right now motorsports does not really have much of an option for that demographic of people where like even that is too expensive. I think motorsports at the moment with like the baseline, like the very minimum you need to get into racing is still quite expensive. Like even just buying like a cheap Logitech wheel and pedal set, it's still like a few $100s, which not everyone can afford, especially at a younger age. And I think because of that, sim racing is not like the ultimate like entry to racing that a lot of people might call it, like say. But I think it's a very good step compared to go-karting, which costs like 10 or 100 times more than sim racing.
So how are your sim racing been actually? I think you race a lot in iRacing. How are your results been?
I haven't raced in iRacing in a while. So I've for the last like 2 months, I've only been doing Assetto Corsa because in my opinion, Assetto Corsa is a little bit better in terms of like driver training and preparation. It kind of feels more like the actual car. I was using it a lot in Abu Dhabi and so on just to prepare for those races. And like because of all the sim racing I did in preparation for Abu Dhabi, I was able to like immediately be close to the pace on even my first practice session, right? So in F4 Trophy, right before qualifying, we only had one practice session, which was like 45 minutes to get up to speed. I ended up finishing that session in like 11th, which in a field like Formula Trophy is actually really a really good result. And that was my first time ever at the track, and it was only purely because I did so many laps on the simulator that I was able to be on pace so quickly. So I think what I'm doing on the simulator now has been working in terms of driver preparation. But iRacing, it's like I have a lot of fun in iRacing and I'm not slow on it because like I have a few like laps that are very competitive. I have quite a few wins in like top split Formula 4, for example. I have a lot of fun racing in Formula 4. Um, because like I think the thing with iRacing is that it's very fun to race and like do races because it's very easy to be consistent. It's very smooth. And it's really nice to go wheel to wheel with people. A set of course is more difficult. Like, it's harder to be consistent. It's easier to make mistakes, and that's why I don't use a set of course for fun. It's more just something I do to train. But iRacing is like when I want to actually get on and practice some racecraft or have some fun racing like competitively. Then I go on iRacing. I think my results on iRacing, I'd say they're pretty good. I'm in Formula 4, I'm almost consistently at least like top five in top split, sometimes top three, and occasionally winning as well. Uh, and I have a lot of fun racing people, and it's also fun because occasionally you get like real racing drivers that you know also racing the same races as you. For example, I think the last Formula 4 win I've had, I won, and I think second place was actually Rowan Campbell Pilling, which was also racing in UAE 4. So it's nice to be able to race with these like top level guys and actually be able to perform competitively against them because on the simulator, I'd like to say I'm very quick. I'm not as quick in real life as I am on the simulator, is basically what I'm trying to say. Because like I've had a lot of time to hone my skills in sim racing, and I think it just clicked easier for me as well. Because like Alex Yoon, for example, like the team principal of Blackguards, and he runs a simulator like team. He says he's very impressed with how quickly I picked up on sim racing despite my like relative lack of experience compared to other people. For example, like we did the the Asia Pacific Motorsport Championship, which is like a big like sim racing competition between a bunch of Asian countries. And it was like we were I was just qualifying for it. I wasn't going to attend it. I was just they basically had like a few qualifying like rounds where you go out and you try to set the fastest lap on the server, and like it happens for a few days, and whoever's in like the top 10 or whatever or top 15 is um allowed to like enter the competition. And so these are like top level guys who have got like um thousands of I rating, like 10,000, like 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, 10,000. So they're all like top level. And I think I'd like to think I was able to compete quite competitively against them. Um, I think in the in one of the rounds, which is like a set of Corsa qualifying, I think I qualified 15th out of like I don't know how many people, but quite a lot. And I was only like I think a couple tenths off. And in the Formula 4 one, I was also only a couple tenths off. So I'd like to think I'm close to like very competitive. I'd like to say I'm very competitive in sim racing, more so than I am in like real life racing. Is well,
How
to
how
cut it short.
realistic is sim racing in preparing you for real life? Because many people say that it's pretty similar. Some people say it's won't prepare you that much. But like you say that you're better in sim racing than in real life. So what's that difference between the conditions in sim racing and real life? Because is it something about the setup of the car, or is it that you're in a physical world? So obviously, to do the same steering inputs that you're doing on a sim would be more difficult to do in real life. So what creates that difference in a sim and in the real life?
I think how you find the simulator is very dependent on your upbringing in motorsports. If you did a lot of karting and then you did a kart testing and then Formula 4 and then you tried sim racing, I think then sim racing doesn't really feel very helpful because it's hard to feel the limit just like visually or with the force feedback. Um, and so it's a little bit difficult for those types of people to jump into sim racing and be competitive quickly. But I think for me, it's kind of like the opposite. I grew up with sim racing, like that's all I did until I started go-karting in Formula 4. And so for me, sim racing is kind of like my natural state where I know exactly how to feel the limit of the car, even just digitally. And I think that's what helps me be so competitive is because I can be on the limit very easily in sim racing. just by feeling the steering wheel or by hearing the car. And it's kind of harder for me in real life where there's so many more variables. It's not as simple as like the force feedback or something. You have to feel how the car is moving, like with your body, and there's so many more senses to get used to. I think that's one of the limiting factors for me. I think as I gain experience, it's kind of closed that gap. But I think a big part of it is two things. It's your upbringing, so whether you did karting or whatever before sim racing, and two, it's also how you treat the simulator. So if you go on the simulator thinking it's a game and just drive it like it's a game, then it's obviously not going to help. But if you jump onto the simulator treating like, okay, this is like an actual free practice session in Formula 4, for example, and you drive exactly how you would in real life, similar braking zones, steering inputs. Obviously, you have to get the settings right, which takes a bit of practice. Um, but if you do that properly, it also will really help you get used to doing those exact things in real life. And I think it's been really helpful for me, at least, in just learning tracks and testing things out. A lot of the corners that I was very good at in Formula 4 UAE, where I was better than some of my other teammates, is the corners where I had a lot of experience, experimentation, and like learning on the simulator. Where on the simulator you can make mistakes, you can crash, you can spin. There's no issue, right? You start again. I think that's another reason why you can be so quick is you just keep doing hundreds and thousands of laps like within a day, basically. So I think that helps kind of build the experience really quickly. But yeah, it's being able to experiment, find things out, find the limit, and finding the limit easily. With my experience, that helps me be very quick on the simulator compared to real life, where I have to be more cautious. I'm not like 100% tuned in with the car. I don't fully know what the car is going to do if I do this and that. I think that's the main thing for me, at least. It's
So
just the difference in variables that you have to worry about.
I think one of the positive attributes about racing is that it's one of the only sports, I think the only sport where you can, exactly simulate the same thing that you're going to do in real life. So I think that's actually a pretty good helping hand for drivers, and especially in this time when, real life testing is so expensive. Okay, I would like to digress a bit more into females in motorsport and F1 Academy a little bit. Do you believe that F1 Academy as a product, it is it necessary, not in terms of like the promotion of women in motorsport, but in terms of the level of competition in F1 Academy and how it's developing the women drivers? Do you believe that, someone to take an approach like Emily Corti or Sophia Fleur should absolutely not gonna do F1 Academy or a pure women only series and only do mixed series, or someone who is doing F1 Academy as a first season purely because it may be slightly cheaper than, Italian F4, Spanish F4, and all these series? So what is your, you know purview on this topic?
I think it's hard to say. I obviously think like Italian F4 or Middle Eastern F4 is much more competitive than F1 Academy. And I think that makes a difference is how competitive the grids are. But I think one of the difficult things is that F1 Academy, it's not clear where the progression is. It's basically like a Formula 4 season, but just with women. I think what helps is that it gives those drivers a lot more attention when they get live streamed on the F1 channel, or they get promotion from F1 teams and F1 drivers and so on. I think that gives them leverage and like they're more known, which helps them secure better seats in like Formula 3, Formula Regional, for example, if they want to. But as far as I know, it hasn't really been very productive in letting girls like actually get up the Formula One ladder. And it's actually already been a few years, and currently there's not been much progress from what I've seen, which I think it's still a good series. I have a lot of fun watching it at least. But in terms of like whether it actually helps women in motorsport get up the Formula ladder is a different story. Um, And I honestly think it's a big part of it is just how difficult it is to get into Formula One to begin with, right? There's 20 people in Formula One, 22 now, but 22 people in Formula One, and there's like 8 billion people in the world. So the chances of being a boy who gets into Formula One is already extremely, extremely low. And then you consider like women in motorsports who obviously currently aren't as big of a demographic compared to boys in motorsports, then that chance is already much lower as well. So I think Formula One Academy is a good like start for the industry to help bring attention for like of women into motorsports and kind of give them a chance to show what they're capable of. But in terms of actually like being as a ladder to step up into Formula 3, I don't think it's really any different compared to like Formula 4 Italian or Formula 4 Middle East, for example. So I think what Emily Cotty is doing, for example, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It just depends on how competitive you are and um, what like if you can get up to Formula 3 or not. Because at the end of the day, to get into Formula Regional, Formula 3, Formula 2, you have to have a lot of money and you also have to be really quick. So if there happened to be a female driver who was really quick in Formula 4, they're winning races in Formula Regional, and they have the money to get into Formula 3, then they I don't think there's really anything stopping them. Um, Same as like if there's a boy who's doing the exact same thing, right? Because like even boys who are like doing really well in Formula 4, Formula Regional, even then they're not guaranteed a Formula 3 seat, they're not guaranteed a Formula 2 seat, they're not guaranteed Formula 1. So I think in a way it's less of a problem of F1 Academy, more just a problem of Formula 1 ladder being really difficult in general.
But in let's say in general, single seaters in general, not just Formula One, Formula Two, Formula Three, IndyCar, Formula E, yada yada yada. Do you think F1 Academy at the level it is, even as champions, Dorian Pin or Abby Pulling, if you win F1 Academy, is it enough? And say that you have the money and the backing to get into a top Formula 3 team. Do you think that would be enough to have them perform well in F3?
Straight from F1 Academy into F3, I don't think so. Like, like Fionn McLaughlin, he's jumping into Formula 3 basically right after Formula 4. Yes, he's doing the Formula Regional in New Zealand right now, but it's still like he's doing Formula 4 season, a winter series, and then right into Formula 3. Even then, with how competitive British F4 is and how good of a driver he is, I still think that's like an insane jump. Like I wouldn't do that. Obviously, like I can't speak for him, but like I wouldn't make the jump from F4 right into F3 right away. So F1 Academy, which I believe is like a bit less of a competitive grid, jumping straight into F3, I just don't think it's like a good idea. I think anyone who does well in Formula 4 at least needs a Formula Regional to kind of get into Formula 3 because it's such a vast difference. And so that's kind of where I stand on it. So I think F1 Academy, I don't think it's any more like of a preparation for Formula 3 as like any other like normal F4 academy like Italy or British or Middle Eastern F4.
I think a lot of people, like earlier, like before, like 24, 23, many people jumped directly from F4 to F3, and then I think it kind of stopped for a couple of years where that immediate progression was happening, and then Fiona is one of the only ones who's done it now in recent times. So do you believe that? Okay, now I've heard many drivers say that the level in the difference in raw talent between a Formula 4 driver and a Formula 3 driver, it's not that much. So is it? Are you trying to imply that there's an extremely large skill gap or an extremely large not in terms of talent, but in terms of the prerequisite skills or experience you require to allow you to perform well in Formula 3, and that would be given to you in a Formula Regional series? Or is it, or does it still make sense to, okay, if McLaughlin is going directly from F4 to F3, it's not like he's going to be in the back of the F3. Of course he's going to score some points, that's a given. So is it still, I mean, realistic to directly get into FA? Because I do feel to an extent that if you're a good driver and if you have the skill, then I think it's doable. And you just need a bit of testing, don't you? Because I think having an additional Formula Regional season, that's just okay, slightly faster car and maybe a better grid, but after all, you can kind of get that entire experience by also testing a lot. So I mean, at the end of the day, it depends on the driver. um oh
Yeah, I
yes.
mean, like I went from rental karting to Formula 4, so I can't
Yeah.
speak much from in terms of like big jumps. But obviously, I think from what I've heard, the Formula 3 car is actually not very. difficult to drive from what I've heard like other drivers saying. So I think a Formula 4 driver jumping into F3 will not drown. As if they're really good in Formula 4, I don't think they'll drown in Formula 3. Like Theo McLaughlin, I'm sure he'll do fine. But I do think that extra season in Formula Regional, which I've heard is a much more difficult car, the old Formula Regional at least. The new one I don't know, but the old Formula Regional, very difficult car, very like troublesome, but it does provide a good platform to like get used to tricky handling, get used to like being smooth on the throttle and so on. That kind of helps transfer into Formula 3. But obviously I've not driven those cars, so I can't really speak much. But that's at least my opinion on it. So if an F1 Academy does do really well and has the money to make it into Formula 3, I don't think there's really any reason why they can't. I think it's just that it's so competitive that you have to have like really proven yourself in F1 Academy to make that actual jump.
Okay. Now I'd like to get back to some pressure in motorsports. So, is there a feeling that, for every driver that, there's so much money that has been invested into them, into what they're doing, and so much preparation has gone into it. And is there a sense of urgency to deliver on a race weekend, to like that heightened pressure, like that crazy pressure that, okay, I have to deliver. My family has put this amount of money. If we don't deliver, my dream is gone. All this money is gone. And I mean, when you're in the car, I mean, outside, I don't know outside the car, but when someone's inside the car, does that pressure come to them? Like that heightened pressure that there is so much in me, invested in me, and I have to deliver. And if I don't deliver, how will I deal with it? You know? So,
I think I think for other drivers, I think for every driver it's a little bit different. What they think in the car. For me, when I'm in the car, the only thing I worry about is what I'm gonna do in that next moment, like what I'm gonna do in the formation lap, what I'm gonna do at the start, what I'm gonna do in this next corner, or how I'm gonna overtake this guy. So when I'm in the car, I only think about what I'm gonna do in the car. So I don't let outside pressure really get to me because it's just not. I don't. In my opinion, I think you shouldn't be thinking too hard about what's going on outside when you're, in the moment. You should be fully focused on driving. But I definitely do think there is a pressure to perform well, um, knowing how much money has been invested, how many expectations are placed upon you. I think I'm a little bit fortunate in having started later in racing. So my parents still don't really see it as like for example, like another driver they're in a Formula One academy, they've done karting for 10 years. They really want to, they're like doing really well in Formula 4 and they're planned for next year to get Formula 3, right? There's a lot of pressure for them into like, okay, I really need to perform every weekend because that's like I have all this experience, I have all this investment, I have all these expectations, and if I don't perform, then my dream is gone and I have nothing else because all I've done in my life is race. I think for me, at least, it's a little bit different because I've started racing so late, and my parents they're not like they've told me before like I don't need you to be a champion. I don't even need you to be a race winner. I just want you to show us that you every time you get into the car you're improving and you're learning and you're bettering yourself because of this racing. Like they see racing as a motivation or tool for me to like improve and become a better person. Oh, wait, give me a moment. But yeah, it's like they see it as a way for a reason. The reason they invest in Formula 4 is because they see that I'm so like determined for it, and they see that I put in so much work into improving myself and becoming a better person, maturing, working out a lot, studying harder in order to be good at Formula 4. So they see it as like a positive investment in helping me become just a better person in general, but they aren't like, okay, you have to win this next race or else we'll stop, right? They never say that to me because they know it's not about the winning. It's more just about becoming a better person than you were yesterday. Um, and also it helps that like I want to be an engineer in the future as well. So I always have that backup. Like if I don't do well in racing, then I can always just be an engineer and use that racing experience to help me be a better engineer. But for many drivers who grew up in racing, like they skip school for racing, they don't even graduate high school. Like if they don't become an F1 driver or if they don't succeed in racing in general, like what can they do after that? They don't have anything to work off of other than driving. So I think that's why they have a lot more pressure than I do, just because um, of like how much they've put into it compared to how much I put in it into it, I guess.
All right, but they also do come from pretty um, well-off background. So even if they don't, perform, I think they still have that kind of a cushion to like kind of keep them
Yeah.
afloat for a couple of
Yeah.
years. Yeah. Okay. I want to talk about the Vietnamese motorsport industry because what in general the entire world knew. Okay, the Hanoi Grand Prix is coming. It's going to come, and then it got cancelled, right? And then we don't know much about Vietnam's motorsport industry, and we know that okay, Alex Sawyer is a driver. Owen Tangavelu was also a
Yeah.
Vietnamese driver, and aside from that, there's not much I personally have seen from Vietnam. So, what is the industry there like in motorsports?
There's nothing. Like, to put it bluntly, there's like nothing. There's rental karting, and that it ends at rental karting. Um, if you ask me, like there used to be some like level of like more professional-ish type of go-karting back in like Alex Sawyer's time. Like Alex Sawyer, he at least when he was 10 years old, he at least was able to start professional go-karting and do a few years in Vietnam and then go to Europe and became quite like actually did pretty well in Europe as far as I knew. Um, in terms of go-karting. But then, when I started racing, there was like it was all gone basically. All the teams are gone, all the carts were like old and rusty and like they don't even work anymore. And it's just rental karting now. Like that's literally all there is in Vietnam. There's some sim racing groups, but they're more like casual than anything. So it's Vietnam is extreme like compared to other countries like Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, or like the countries surrounding it. Vietnam is much more limited in terms of what it offers for motorsports compared to those countries. It's just there's so little um, that I feel like unless big steps are taken, it'll be very difficult for more people like me to make that jump into Formula 4, Formula 3, Formula 2, unless they're very fortunate and have like a fortunate family or good connections. And yeah, like you consider Alex Sawyer, for example. Okay, he had karting, he at least had karting back when Vietnam actually had that sort of industry and then he went into Europe and then India and then did Formula racing. But then you look at Owen Tangarello, he doesn't grow up in Vietnam, right? He started go-karting in France and did Formula racing in France and races under a French license, and then that's where he got his start. And then there's me, where I started racing. The go-karting was all gone. There's just rental karting, and yeah, so Vietnam is just extremely limited in the options that we have right now. I think one of my main goals, if I don't become like, even if I, okay, if I become a racing driver, like a Formula One driver, for example, which is unlikely, but if it does happen, then one of the first things I want to do with the influence and the money I have is to help actually build some sort of industry for motorsports in Vietnam, and actually give people who love motorsports in Vietnam like a chance to actually move up to like the international level at least. Um, because like the Vietnamese ASN is just like one man who does almost all the work, and I've been working a lot with them to try and at least raise awareness of motorsports, but the options we have are very limited. And so I think at the moment Vietnam is probably one of like the most lacking countries in terms of racing industry and infrastructure. And I think that's why there's been so little in terms of racing history in this country. Like there's three Formula drivers, and I'm the only one ever in Vietnam's history that's like fully Vietnamese and is racing in Formula, which I think is a bit crazy to think about, but yeah, it's also a bit sad because this is such a big country with over 90 million, like 100 million people living in, it, and only one person, which like me, currently races in Formula, which is yeah,
I think it's a shame that the Grand Prix was cancelled because if you had a Grand Prix coming in the streets of Hanoi, then that would have completely popularized the sport across the country. It would have been a hit. So is there still a market or a demand for motorsport in Vietnam? Is it much known there? Like in India, like 6 years ago, I was the only guy in my school who knew about F1. But now everyone's an F1 fan all of a sudden because of social media and whatnot. Is there a is there a growing interest in motorsport in Vietnam? Is there a market for it?
I think that's at least one of the more positive things because there is a kind of like a growing ish interest for motorsports for Vietnam. So like more people are knowing F1, more people are knowing other series. I've seen more rental karting places open up, or old ones kind of re-establishing themselves and reopening business. I've seen more karting like groups, like academies in rental karting kind of open up, teaching little kids how to race go-karts. I think that's all very positive. But I definitely think the Hanoi Grand Prix being canceled was a huge setback. Because if we had that big racetrack established, then I think we could have done a lot more racing events and so on. But like to begin with, we don't even have like a real proper car track. We have a motorcycle racetrack, which we use for karting, but we almost never use it for car racing. So um, I think that's one of the big limitations that the lack of industry, like a lack of infrastructure. I don't think there's a lack of interest at all. I think there's many people, even in my school, or I know that love racing and would love for it to be more popular in the country and like become an actual industry. But just yeah, it's the lack of infrastructure and like established industry that's really setting us back at the moment.
Yeah. And oh, talking about you, do you have any plans like as already like in place, set plans in terms of racing for 2026? Is there anything in paper yet?
For 2026, it's finish the Middle East with Qatar and then do a few rounds in Southeast Asia. I'm not sure if I'm going to do the full season or maybe only a couple rounds because I might go to, I'm going to be going to America after that. And then after that, it's just, I've been looking around to see what teams are open for like USF 2000 or USF Pro, for example. Seeing if I can maybe get a team in the US to race in, maybe do some testing in 2026, and then do a full season in 2027, for example. So it's not anything official. That's what I plan on doing. But yeah,
All right. Well, thank you so much. I think we covered many topics. Thank you so much once again for joining me and letting me take your interview.
yeah,
Thank you
no
so
problem.
much.
Thank you very much for having me as well. I had
Thank
a
you.
lot of fun just sharing my story and talking.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you. And I hope that next, like this year in the US, you either get a seat or next year and you have a great career ahead. And I think for the circumstances that you had, I think it's still a big achievement of what you've done. And I think many people in Vietnam, if they get to know about motorsport in coming years, would be inspired by your story in how you got into motorsports and your circumstances. So thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you again.